Hello, this is Dr. Edwards-Hampton, clinical psychologist at the Weight Management Center. It looks like we have about 9 participants in the room. If you guys would you go ahead and just send me a message letting me know that you can hear me and see me okay? Sounds great. Got a few people coming through. Thank you. So, I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk to you about managing cues today. I am still getting used to the whole virtual format, but like I said, excited to spend this time with you and to continue to hone my skills in providing these online support groups. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on time. Our topic today is managing cues, and one thing that you'll hear me do quite a lot is use the word cues and triggers interchangeably. So another way of thinking about cues is managing triggers, things within you, outside of you, that may cue you or trigger you to want to eat. And sometimes that cue or trigger can be motivate you to eat on plan or off plan. And we're going to talk about the different types of cues that exist and how to manage them, that sort of thing. Oh, the other thing I want to say too is I'm going to try pretty hard to keep this interactive, so please pay attention to your screen, use your chat box, and respond as I ask questions, because that makes the whole experience more meaningful, rich, and interesting for everyone. So what triggers eating behaviors? We like to suggest that there are 3 major categories or 3 major things that trigger or cue eating behaviors. There are social cues or social interactions, environmental cues, and then also internal cues. And as we're able to identify what cues or what's triggering us in these different areas, then we're able to create behaviors to help us navigate these environments or these areas more appropriately and successfully. So can you guys give me some examples? What might be an example of a social interaction that might trigger a desire to eat food? A reunion, okay? Work after hours event, holiday, work meeting, just eating out in general. Yeah, so just maybe going out on a date night with our spouse or with family, that sort of thing. And what about, the reason I ask you for these examples is sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to differentiate between these different categories, because in many ways these things that you're describing that are social interactions are also environmental, right? So we're in a restaurant eating, that sort of thing. So how might we distinguish between environmental triggers and social interactions? What would be some examples of environmental triggers? Any thoughts? Going to the state fair and smelling funnel cakes, that is a great example. Fall weather equals comfort food, that's a great example too. Vacation. And the thing that you'll find as we talk, and this is part of, I think that, I often say, folks, this is part of what can make trying to manage triggers and lose weight and create a healthy lifestyle so difficult, is that often these triggers are not independent of one another, right? So it's not just the fact that we're celebrating with family, we're also in a restaurant where we're smelling all kinds of wonderful food, which is environmental. So often, many of these cues are working together to trigger us to want to eat, and to potentially make off-plan or poor food choices. And so on one hand, I think it can be frustrating, like, wow, we have such a mountain to climb because there are so many different cues that can be working on us simultaneously. But it also hopefully makes sense of why this journey is so difficult, because it's really not simple, it's not discrete, it's not just a social interaction. There are often many cues happening all at once. And the way to overcome them, or at least manage them so that you can make decisions that are consistent with your health goals, is to become more aware of what cues are influencing you and which ones are most powerful over you. So for me, the cue of being around family and celebrating and the sense of nurturing and bonding that comes with that may be a much stronger cue than smelling the food in the restaurant. Whereas for someone else, the smell of the food in the restaurant may be a much stronger cue. So I encourage you to think about And as we talk about examples and scenarios in the future, to think about what cue is this in a given scenario, what cue is strongest for you, and how you might manage that. What might be some examples of internal cues? Boredom, great. Craving, great. Fatigue or feeling tired. Enjoyment of the food, so sort of the pleasure that comes, the sort of activation of those pleasure pathways in our brain when we have food. Great. So internal cues are often things that come from within us, right? And often they are emotional cues, but sometimes they can be physical cues too, right? So what might be some physical internal cues? What are some physical internal cues that our body sends us that triggers us to want to eat? Hunger. Okay, so hunger is good, but how do you know you're hungry? How does your body tell you you're hungry? What are some physiological internal cues for hunger? Stomach growls. Great. That's the sort of thing I'm looking for. We may feel weak. We may feel a little lightheaded. If we really go too long, we may feel a little bit nauseous. Irritable is a good one, although a little bit more emotional. Sometimes our stomach may yawn. I think another one is thirst, mistaken for hunger. So that could be another cue. Maybe we're thirsty, and we may think that we're hungry but we're actually thirsty. It's very difficult to tell the difference between thirst and hunger. So internal cues are often emotional, but they can be physiological too. And this is a nice segue into our next slide. So one of the biggest cues for eating behaviors is actually hunger, right? So we have cues within social interactions, within the environment, and internal cues, but also feeling hungry is a major cue that triggers us to eat. And there are actually two types of hunger. There's physical hunger and emotional hunger. And it's really important that you are aware of the difference between these two categories, and that you develop a skill set for identifying which you're feeling. And sometimes you may feel a little bit of both, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But piggybacking on some of the things that we just discussed, we know that we're physically hungry when we have that internal cue of our stomach pains, lightheadedness, things going on in stomach growling, things going on inside of our body. Another cue that we're physically hungry is that a certain amount of time, or a decent amount of time, typically 2.5, 3 hours, has gone by since our last eating episode. So it typically develops slowly and is not an abrupt craving or sort of desire impulse that we have. And it happens at a pretty specific time after, at a specific time point after eating. Also, typically with physical hunger, when we meet physical hunger with the nutrition that our body wants and needs, then we typically feel satisfied and it goes away. If you find that after you eat, you're wanting more, or that didn't quite, people say, well, that didn't quite fix my taste buds, now I want something sugary, and you're looking to sort of satisfy something internally that was not satisfied by an adequate or a reasonable amount of food, then there's a good chance that you're struggling with emotional hunger. Emotional hunger typically develops pretty suddenly. It's often sort of an impulsive feeling. It often will occur as a result of some type of external cue, and sometimes an internal cue. But often the internal cue is triggered by an external cue. So let me give you an example of that, because it's a little complicated. So, we're rushing to get to work, we got up early with plenty of time, the dog peed on the carpet, the kids are tantruming, we get to work, our boss gives us a hard time. A lot of external sort of environmental things are happening. And now we have an internal response of stress, fatigue, a lot of negative emotions. And so that external experience and the internal experience then triggers us to want to grab a donut from the break room, even though we just had breakfast an hour ago and we don't have any physiological symptoms of hunger, such as stomach pains, like lightheadedness, that sort of thing. Often emotional hunger is preoccupied or preceded with a preoccupation with food. So often we're thinking about, what do I want? What do I feel like? What would taste good? We're often thinking about and preparing for what emotional response or impact would taking this food in have on us. And that is often a sign of emotional hunger, not physical hunger. And then often, as I mentioned before, you're not satisfied by the eating episode. And so afterwards you're wanting, I just had sweet, so now I want salty, or I want something crunchy, that sort of thing. Sometimes physical hunger and emotional hunger can happen together. And that's why it's really important to, one, eat on a regular schedule. So that's why we want you all eating at least every 3 hours, and meeting your physical needs. So getting in adequate amounts of protein, and have it meet having your body get its nutritional needs. Because when you're eating regularly and eating the right things, then you're less likely to be vulnerable to emotional hunger. So all of us have had that time where we have waited too long to eat, and our stomach is growling, we feel nauseous, our blood sugar may be elevated where we're feeling dizzy and really sick and having those terrible feelings. And we say, I'm physically hungry, I need to eat. And so we decide to eat. But when we make a choice, we may not make a choice that's best to satisfy our physical hunger. It may be a choice that's based on emotional hunger, because we've gotten so hungry that now we'll just eat anything in sight. And we're not willing to wait or plan, or we're more vulnerable because we're feeling more desperate. We're more vulnerable to eat whatever is closest and easiest. And so it's really important to identify when you're feeling physically hungry. Ideally, if you think about physical hunger on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not very hungry at all, and 10 being terribly starving, famished, you want to try to eat between sort of like the 4 and 7 range. You don't want to ever let yourself get up to the 8, 9, 10, because then you're vulnerable to making poor choices or overeating. So let's talk a little bit more. We already came up with some examples, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about social interactions and social cues. Often people in our life trigger us to eat or drink in a maladaptive way. Okay, so sometimes this can be pleasant interactions. We have our girlfriends or our men's group, and when we get together, we drink alcohol and we have a big meal, and that's just what we do. That's our regular way of bonding and connecting. That can be a big trigger, even when we are on and many of you may have identified this, even when maybe we're on a healthy plan and we've been practicing a healthy lifestyle for several weeks at a time. Anticipation of that event, that girls' night, can be really difficult and really trigger a lot of cravings and desire to engage in maladaptive eating, because those women or those individuals in our brain are associated with eating popcorn, drinking wine, that sort of thing. And so by association, when we think about those women or engage with those women in that way, we start craving and really wanting those foods and those drinks that we have engaged in the past. And what's really important in managing this, and I know this is easier said than done, but it's really important that you break that association. And many of you can probably relate to this in other ways too, like eating in front of the TV, that sort of thing. If you're used to eating in front of the TV, often, even when you're not hungry, even maybe right after you had a meal, you sit down in front of the TV, and that TV triggers you to want to eat, because your body is paired and your mind has paired TV with eating. Same thing with hang out with these lady friends or this guy's group and eating and drinking. So what's really important is that you actually break that association. You retrain your brain and your body to not associate those folks with that food or eating behavior. And like I said, it's easier said than done, but really what's most important is that you abstain from and create new patterns with those individuals where you're not eating and drinking with them. Maybe you're doing other activities, or they're eating and drinking, but you're abstaining. But really what you need to do is for yourself kind of break that association, break that change. The good news is if you practice that consistently and regularly find ways to not engage in eating in front of the TV or eating and drinking with girlfriends or guy friends. Maybe instead with those girlfriends you initiate a physical activity event. The association between the two breaks pretty quickly, and it gets a lot easier. So the first few times are difficult, but over time your body will sort of disconnect that association and it will become easy on you. However, if you re-engage in those behaviors, like start eating in front of the TV again, then your body, your brain will reconnect that association very quickly and very strongly. It's sort of your brain's a smart machine, and it knows how to put together puzzle pieces that have been put together in the past and now taken apart. So same thing with special occasions, holidays, birthday, travel. All of these things are things that we associate with eating and that often are triggers for us. And we're going to talk in more detail in a minute about ways to manage these special occasions, because for many of us, they're important to us. They're valuable beyond just the eating. They're about bonding. They're about celebrating individuals. It's about meaningful interaction. And so it's not realistic nor healthy for you to just sort of disengage from all of these types of social interactions. We don't want you to have to sacrifice social interactions for the sake of having a healthy lifestyle in terms of your eating and drinking and exercise level. If you have to sacrifice all of your social interactions in order to create a healthy new lifestyle, then we're really missing the point. The point here is for you to have a good quality of life all around, including your relationship with food, your physical health, exercise, as well as your social interactions. Just want to take a moment to see if there are any questions or comments so far. Any thoughts? All right, it doesn't look like, it doesn't look like there's much coming up, so we'll keep going. So here are examples of environmental cues too. So, and I love the example of going to the fair and smelling the funnel cake. So it can be smells, it can be sights, it can be sounds. I don't know how many of you are from Winston-Salem, but how many of you guys have gone to the mall here and smelled the Cinnabon as they're walking past, as you're walking past or walking in the mall? It's pretty brutal. You can smell it from really far away, and it can be a huge activation on so many levels, right? Because one, it just smells good, but it also can remind us of so many emotional things, like grandma's home or the baking that mom used to do when we were kids, and it evokes this nostalgia and this whole sort of big emotional response that is more than just, wow, that smells good. And it's funny too, funny and tragic. A lot of industries will capitalize on this, right? So you better believe that Cinnabon is aware that it's triggering folks walking by to want Cinnabons, and that's part of the reason why they do it. There's a restaurant in town. Maybe you guys, here's a little trivia. There's a restaurant in town that uses this a lot, and one of their common advertising mottos is free smells. What am I talking about? Anyone know? Jimmy John's, right? Free smells. That is a play on the fact that smelling things is going to trigger us to want to eat them, even when we're not necessarily hungry and don't necessarily have physiological hunger. Any of the participants today work in the hospital? We got one. Yeah, we got a few. Okay, so how many of you want to die when walking by the Subway downstairs and you smell that fresh bread? So we've got some other comments going on about how Disney World actually pumps bakery smells into their walkways, which is ridiculous. That's crazy. But we do know that Disney is the one of the masters of using emotions to sell products. But yeah, so that's one of the things. I don't work at the hospital regularly. Sometimes I come over there, but that's one of the things that I always notice, especially when I'm coming in through Watlington, is just the smell of that fresh baked bread as soon as you come in to Subway. And it's sort of like, doesn't matter what time of day it is, you can smell it. And that can just be a huge trigger for wanting to eat. And again, the comfort of fresh baked items, that sort of thing. So pastime, that's what I was talking about before. Many of us associate food with certain rituals. So watching TV, sitting at a computer, reading and snacking, working late at night, that sort of thing. So it's really important for you to identify, what are my habits around food? What are the things that I associate with food? For a lot of folks, it's in the car. It's eating in the car. What happens is then whenever folks get in the car, they get triggered to eat. And so it's important for you to think about that. And even though you may not be engaging in those things now, maybe because you're on full meal replacement, that sort of thing, it is really important you think about, what were my triggers in the past? Because the things that you struggled with in the past are likely to be the things that you're going to struggle with in the future as you continue to transition to a new lifestyle that involves meals, 3 to 5 times a day. Also timing. So this is a big one for me. And again, I think there are multiple cues associated with this, but one of the things that I've always struggled with is when I get off work and I get home, I find myself going straight to the kitchen and opening the pantry or the refrigerator and looking in there to see what's there. And immediately it's like, I think there are a lot of cues for me. Sometimes it is a bit of hunger, maybe because I didn't have my snack. Often it's just that the act of coming home and being done for the day, and I need a reward or I want to relax. And sometimes I think it's just the cue of the kitchen. When I'm in the kitchen, that's just kind of what I do, and often I don't even think about it. What are some timing cues that you guys experience? Can you provide some other examples of times that kind of trigger you to want to eat for whatever reason? So someone else said, I've learned never to go directly to the kitchen after work, so probably struggled with the same thing that I did. But when the kids are snacking, that's a great example. That can really trigger us to want to eat because we're exposed to that food. And I think also it's easy for us to say, well, if they're eating, then it's probably time for me to eat too. But that's not always the case. Late in the evening, after work, particularly on Friday because it's the weekend, I certainly struggle with that too. And then after the dinner, if I don't get out of the kitchen, continuing to sort of pick at those leftovers, that sort of thing. And then there's a recommendation of drink a lot of water to sort of help manage those things, which I think is great. And then places in our environment can also trigger eating. Working at desk, being in the kitchen, like we've already identified, buffets, sitting in the car, that sort of thing. Are there other places that trigger you guys? Are there certain, can you give me some examples? I have some in mind, but I don't want to, I'm interested to hear if there are other maybe less traditional places that trigger you guys to want to eat or to make poor food choices or overeat. Smell of Mexican food, Chick-fil-A. Watching TV. Oh, movie theater is a great one. Driving past McDonald's. So with the Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, is it the smell that triggers you, or is it just the sight of the location? Oh, memories and the smell for some folks. Okay. What about other places? Like, what about going home? Like going back to mama's house or going to certain friends' house? Are there certain environments that sort of trigger you to want to eat more? Friends' houses or your in-laws, that sort of thing. Like we got a few people typing in. Yeah, my grandma's good friends, that sort of thing. White Castle hamburger when traveling to my hometown in Michigan. So yes, these are all great examples, especially with places like White Castle where we may not have access to it regularly or easily, and when we associate it with things like going home and being at home. Internal triggers. So we've already identified some of them. When we're just plain old tired, it's completely true. We lose our inhibitions when we're fatigued. So we just don't have the energy, the cognitive drive and ability to fight cravings and often not make good decisions when we're tired. So often, we have limited control over the fact that we're tired at the end of the day after a hard day's work. So what are ways that we can make sure that fatigue does not trigger us to make bad decisions? Any thoughts? Drink more water. That's good. Stop a lot when driving. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit? Oh, like taking breaks. Good. So taking breaks to rest, walk around, get some fresh air. That's a great idea. Oxygenating our body gives us energy and can relax us. Attending an exercise class is great because it can help curb appetite and activate energy. Deep breathing, these are all wonderful strategies. The other thing that comes to mind is just making sure that we're planning ahead, right? So if I know that I'm tired when I get home from work and that I don't have the energy or even just the ego strength, just sort of the willpower to prepare a healthy meal when I get home, then I need to have a healthy meal waiting for me so that I'm not vulnerable to just grabbing something on the way home that's easy because I'm tired and I just don't have the willpower. The other thing too is just to make sure that you do everything you can to minimize your fatigue. So things like exercising, taking breaks, deep breathing, but also making sure that you get enough sleep at night are all great ways to sort of combat fatigue taking over and leading to poor choices. And then faulty thinking, right? So there's a lot of these internal triggers, sort of automatic thoughts, like I should have conquered this by now, or it's a lost cause, or I'm already off track, so I may as well just eat whatever I want. I'll start again tomorrow. Tomorrow's a new day. All of these things can trigger and rationalize making poor choices. The idea is that even if you've gotten off track, there's no need to villainize yourself for it, but it's good and important to move on right away, right? So that happened, I can't change that now, but I can move forward from this point on making healthier decisions. The putting off till tomorrow or next week or that sort of thing, it can be a really big barrier to establishing new healthy behaviors. Any other faulty thinking that you guys can come up with that may be a trigger to just go ahead and sort of eat or drink whatever you feel like? What are some ones? We all have that internal dialogue. What are some things that you find sort of yourself saying to yourself to rationalize eating what you might feel like at the time? So it doesn't look like we have, let me see. Oh, I deserve it. Oh, it'll just be a small portion, that sort of thing. And we're gonna go over some examples at the end, and there are some more that I think you guys will relate to that can be internal triggers. It's just one thing off plan. I just can't help it. These are all great. And then the last internal trigger, which I think many of us are aware of in terms of sort of being knowledgeable that emotional hunger can drive us, but may not be as in touch with our emotions as we need or should be. But often we manage our mood with food, right? So if we're bored, we eat. If we're stressed, we eat. We use food for comfort. We use food as a method for bonding, for celebration. And so we feed that emotional hunger rather than feeding our body or responding to physiological needs. So a couple strategies that I want to talk to you about and give you for managing, sort of identifying whether it's physical hunger or emotional hunger, and sort of finding a way to make good decisions. So when you identify that you've been triggered by a food cue, or if you are thinking about your past and identifying, okay, what are my triggers or my cues? Some of the things that I want you to think in the moment and ask yourself is, what am I feeling? What am I feeling right now? So I have the impulse to eat a candy bar. What am I feeling and what do I need? And sometimes you may say, you do sort of an internal body scan, you may say, well, my stomach does feel kind of empty and it is kind of growling and I am feeling a little lightheaded. And then you look at your watch and you're like, wow, it was 2 hours and 45 minutes ago since I ate. And so you may identify, I'm feeling real physical hunger and what I need is food. I need to nourish my body. And then the next question is, what kind of food? How am I going to give my body what it needs? At this point, when you identify, well, I am physically hungry, it's time to eat, you still have a choice to make a good decision or a bad decision. As I was suggesting earlier, you're much more likely to make a good decision if your physiological hunger has not gotten too extreme. Often when you ask yourself, what am I feeling, what do I need, you're going to identify that you may be able to identify, I'm actually feeling an emotional response. So one of the things that I struggle with a lot, like one of my biggest triggers at work, is when I'm procrastinating. Maybe I've just finished a big thing on my to-do list. It's time to transition to the next thing, but I'm sort of tired and I really don't want to get started on it. And I often find that I want to eat in order to kind of justify procrastinating. And so if I don't want to do something or start something at work, a new project, maybe if it's writing notes, something that's kind of tedious but that we have to do, I will often feel cued to want to eat. And I think part of it is that I feel like rationalize, well, you can stop working and take a break if it's time to eat. But I often have to stop myself and say, wait, is it actually time to eat? Am I really hungry? When's the last time I ate? It happened even this morning. It was 10 o'clock and I was not wanting to start the next project. And I remember thinking, well, I should get a snack. And then I looked back and I was like, no, I didn't. I had breakfast at 8:30. I'm not hungry. I'm responding to an emotional internal cue that should not lead to eating. And so then I said, well, what do I need? I've identified it now. It's really about procrastination. It's about, and I said, what I need and what I'm looking for is a break. And so how's a healthy way that I can give myself a break? And one that's going to be, relatively exciting for me, because if you're like, well, I'm going to take a break, and you go do something that you hate, like let's say you go for a walk. Let's say you hate walks. Often a walk is a good plan, but if you hate walks and you come back and feel like you didn't get your break, you're going to be right back to being cued to want to eat. So think about, what do I need right now that will actually help me manage this craving and this strong cue? Maybe it's taking 5 minutes to call a friend. Maybe it's drinking some water. Maybe it's getting on Pinterest for 5 minutes, or something that you're going to find actually does fill you up emotionally, so that you're not filling up your emotional needs with food. Does that make sense to you guys? I really encourage you to write a little sticky note and put it around your house or your office, and regularly ask yourself, what am I feeling and what do I need? And I think that you will find that this is a really valuable tool to practice, even with regard to getting to know yourself better and taking care of yourself better. So it may not even be something that you do in response to a hunger cue. It may be just something that you decide to do 4 times a day, so that you can identify what's going on with you, be in touch with your body and your emotions, and begin practicing becoming familiar with those things and how to respond to them. So one of the folks responded, yes, this sounds great, I get it, but it's easier said than done. And that's absolutely true. But I promise you, the more you practice this, the more it will become easy. And it will eventually become second nature, where you are just on a day-to-day basis more in tune with what you're emotionally feeling. So even if it means saying, all right, I'm going to set an alarm on my phone, and every 3 hours or every 2 hours, I'm going to check in with myself. What am I feeling? What do I need? And you really answer those questions. Like sometimes you may say, I'm feeling peaceful, or I'm feeling proud because I just accomplished something 2 hours earlier than I thought I was going to get it done today. All that's fine, but just checking in and having sort of that emotional body scan is really beneficial for being more emotionally intelligent and savvy. And it will also help you manage emotional eating and differentiate between different types of hunger cues. It also, for the record, can be great in building relationships. So you may even want to try doing this, incorporating this at home with your spouse, maybe at the end of the night, an emotional check-in. What are you feeling? What do you need? Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I need. And something that you can try with your children, too, to help them begin to become emotionally aware of what they're feeling and what they're needing. I have a 2.5-year-old, and I've just started doing this with him, helping him identify what his emotions are and asking him specific emotions, that sort of thing. I think that you'll find that this strategy will really transform your life in a lot of ways if you practice it and it becomes sort of second nature to you. So again, once you identify that you're physically hungry, you sort of have, the way I think about it is you sort of have two ways to go. You can eat something good or eat something bad. If you identify that you are emotionally hungry or being cued environmentally and that your body does not need that sustenance or that food at that time, that nourishment at that time, then you can eat anyway. Or you can find a way to manage those triggers. And what I'd like to suggest is that there's two major ways to manage those triggers. There's eliminating the trigger and there's adapting the trigger, the cue. So can you guys give me some examples of what it may mean to eliminate a trigger or a cue? Okay, so one person, a couple folks have said, eliminating a cue or a trigger is, I do not keep candy in the house. Another one is, I don't drive past McDonald's. These are great examples, right? We just eliminate the ability for these things to have impact on us, right? So if having sugar in the house cues us to want to eat off plan, if we remove the sugar, then it's not even an issue. We don't have to deal with it. The good thing about elimination is it can actually happen, and also with adaptation. These things can happen before and in the moment, right? So what I really encourage you to do is reflect and say, what are my triggers? What have they been in the past? They may not be triggers that are relevant to you right now because maybe you're on full meal replacement, that sort of thing. But identify what have been your triggers in the past and how can you, moving forward, have a plan for eliminating or adapting them. So once you're maybe back eating food, you may be more vulnerable to stopping at McDonald's on the way home. Right now, you may pass McDonald's every day and not stop there because you're on full meal replacement. You just know you're not going to eat, or it's sort of clear to you. But eventually, it may be a lot more difficult. So maybe it's a good idea now to come up with a different route home where you're not driving past that queue of McDonald's. But we also have the opportunity sometimes to eliminate in the moment, right? So let's say my friends come up to me and they say, we're going to get Japanese for lunch, come out with us, right? And I'm like, oh, that would be great. One, because I love Japanese and there's all this, they usually overserve you there, right? You have these huge portions with tons of rice, and I'm feeling just exhausted and stressed and I need a break, and these friends make me laugh, and so I really want to go, right? and I think this is a good idea. But then when I do what am I feeling, what do I need, I realize that I'm really vulnerable to overeating and making poor choices. There's a really slim chance that I'm going to go and get the chicken with no sauce and sauteed vegetables, given my emotional state, my physical state. And so it's a good idea for me to just eliminate that cue in the moment by deciding not to go with my friends. So there are times where in the moment you can eliminate the cue, and there are times where you can plan ahead. What might be, sometimes we can't eliminate cues, right? So like my husband is a big cue for me wanting to eat, because we have spent a lot of our relationship sort of enjoying food together, that sort of thing. Well, I can't eliminate my husband, right? I mean, I could, but that would probably wouldn't end well for me. Sometimes we're inevitably in situations. Maybe a cue is we have a boss that's sort of rude to us and disrespectful, and we can't eliminate them. So what are some ways that we can adapt triggers, or adapt ourselves to the triggers, so that we don't have a problem with them leading to off-plan eating behaviors? Okay, great example. Go and ask for a box to go. Put half of the food in the box before eating it. Got some more people typing in here. How might we adapt our environment or our response, our behaviors, so that we're not triggered? 1, review the menu and know what you're going to order before you get there. That's great. Bring your own salad dressing. Maybe eat before you go to events. At least then you're minimizing the physiological cue that you may get hungry, and then all that's there are things that you shouldn't be eating. What are some other adaptations? Let's say you're in the break room and you're stressed out, and you notice someone brought in a bunch of Krispy Kreme donuts, right? And they're still warm, only 2 have been eaten, there's 10 left, right? So you could eliminate the cue by throwing them away. But you might kind of feel like a jerk if you did that, because someone intentionally brought them in to share with everyone, and other coworkers may want to eat those someone just said eat them all. That is another way of eliminating the cue, or I don't know if it's quite eliminating, but anyway, that's a funny response. So let's say you don't want to throw them away. What might be a way that you could adapt to that situation? Leave the break room, drink a shake, or eat a protein before the event, go out for a walk. These are all great ideas. So sometimes the thing that we want most in that moment when we're stressed is to eat, and that's the thing that seems that it would be the most comforting. And maybe it is the most comforting thing you could do in that moment. But the idea is to identify other things that can be comforting for you, other coping strategies that you can put in the place of the food, and that you can utilize as a response inside of the food. One thing that I think is important to know, and this can, I think, sometimes be freeing and a way to give yourself some grace. Sometimes folks have a hard time with using positive coping strategies, and I think someone even mentioned something along these lines above in some of the online feedback. Sometimes folks really struggle to implement positive coping strategies because nothing sounds as good as the donut. And they feel like, I need to replace this with something that's going to make me feel as good or as satisfied as the donut. And if you have that mentality, then you're probably never going to find something, and you're always going to give in to the donut. The fact of the matter is, there may not be anything in that moment that is as good as eating that candy bar. And that's okay. You don't have to find something that's perfect or equal. You probably won't. The idea is that you find something that's good enough to help you sort of get through the craving and the negative emotion, so that you don't give in to that candy bar. And in the long run, your body will begin to associate stress relief and managing mood with the new positive coping strategy, not with leaning towards unhealthy foods. And you'll also find that the positive coping strategy, like going for a walk, taking deep breaths, and oxygenating your body, makes you feel better for longer than eating the donut, right? So you might get a huge sort of pleasure spike from eating the donut, but then you have the drop, right? Your pleasure curve or your satisfaction curve for going for a walk may not be like that huge spike. It may be like this, but it stays up here longer. And so it's more of a sort of delayed gratification model. So the take-home point is nothing's probably going to be as good as what you want in that moment, whether it's the candy bar, the Krispy Kreme, or the piece of pizza, or whatever. Just find something that's good enough that will help give you the strength to kind of get through the craving and the initial strong emotional response. Okay. So practice makes habit. It's really important that you plan ahead so that you become aware of what your triggers are, so that you know in advance, okay, I'm going to, be going to this Christmas party. I should eat beforehand. I need to make sure that I've got enough sleep the night before, that I'm hydrated, that you're managing a lot of your triggers and in a position to make the best choices while you're there. And it's also important that you have multiple sort of strategies should something unexpected come up, right? So we can plan ahead for what, a party that we know is going to happen, but maybe someone comes up and says something rude to us at the party that we didn't predict. So you always want to have sort of these coping strategies in your toolbox to manage unexpected triggers and cues. This does take practice. It doesn't happen overnight. It does get easier with time. It can be really a really good strategy for helping you identify what your patterns are and triggers are, or food journaling, but also emotional journaling. So keep a log of foods eating, your behaviors, your mood before those eating episodes, during those eating episodes, that sort of thing. And then sit back, come back and reflect. So the purpose, a lot of folks think that the food journal and the emotional journaling is really to hold you accountable in the moment. Like, if I have to write it down right now, then I'm going to be more conscious about what I'm eating and what's in it. And that's true. But it's also supposed to be a resource of data for you, where you can go back and identify patterns over the past year. If you are only writing down your emotions and food journaling for the data in the moment or for the self-control in the moment, then you're missing out on a huge benefit of the whole food journaling process. The idea is you go back, look through your journals, identify patterns, identify triggers, learn from your experience so that you can overcome those things in the future. The fact of the matter is that for most people who struggle with making healthy choices and have struggled with their weight, there is a lot of underlying habits, behaviors, emotions that are going on that they are not aware of, that they're not cognizant of or conscious of, and that are happening sort of underneath the radar. The food journal can be a great resource for you to go back, look at more objectively, and say, okay, what are the patterns, what are the triggers, what happened here, what was the, was timing an issue, that sort of thing. So I really encourage you to journal your emotions, journal your food, and in the moment, but also go back and see what you can learn from all that data that you've collected and work that you've done. So we have a few minutes left. I'd like to just end by doing a little activity where I give you some scenarios, and I would like, or some triggers, and I'd like you to identify ways that the situation could be adapted, either by your behavior or by adapting the environment, that sort of thing. So my cue, my food cue or trigger is, I'm passing several of my favorite fast food restaurants on my way home from work. So how might you adapt? One person said change routes, and we talked about that above. What might be some other things? Because changing routes is actually kind of eliminating, right? Change lanes. Okay, that's good. Have a healthy snack in the car. Perfect. Concentrate on the radio. Water in the car. Great. So all kinds of self-care activities. Maybe talk on the phone and distract yourself so that you're not even noticing the fast food restaurants, that sort of thing. maybe eating before you go, so that, yeah, there we go. Eat a high protein snack before driving home. These are great. Okay, let me give you a new trigger. I've been following the plan for the past 4 weeks, and I just weighed and saw that I haven't lost weight again. So this is a really common one where we have a lot of internal cues of emotional cues of frustration and self-talk of, what's the point? I'm working so hard. It's not even doing anything for me anyway. What about when we have that trigger, that external trigger of no weight loss, even when we're doing what we're supposed to, and then internal cues of, this is pointless. I may as well just eat whatever I want. So we have one person who's saying, reframe and focus on the positive of not gaining. Focus on the long term, not the short term, which is great. Talk to your behaviors clinical team. Nothing changes if nothing changes, which is sort of a mantra of, keep making changes, keep working at it. Focus on the positives, which is a great input. So, we all know it can be incredibly frustrating if we're following the plan, doing everything we're supposed to for 4 weeks and we're not losing any weight. We're at a plateau. But I think that it's really valuable to, as some participants have said, to focus on the bigger picture, the bigger goal, and also a lot of non-related, weight-related or scale-related victories, right? So most of us did not join this program just to see the scale go down. The scale is just a physical representative of what we're really trying to accomplish, which may be feeling better, having more energy, more ability to engage in activities with our friends and family, fitting into smaller clothes, bringing down our, some of our weight-related medical comorbidities. So there are typically for everyone a lot of other reasons why we're motivated to lose weight. The scale is just one way to measure, identify progress. And so if that one measure is not giving you the positive feedback that you'd like and it's discouraging you, it's really important maybe to focus on some of the other benefits. So sometimes folks will say, yeah, the scale hasn't changed, but my clothes feel more comfortable, or I'm able to cross my legs now, or my A1Cs are in a healthy range, or I'm feeling so much more energy, I'm sleeping better at night, that sort of thing. So really focusing on all the other positive aspects of the weight loss journey. All right, so I've got one more example, and I'll let you guys give me some feedback on how you might adapt your behavior to the situation, and then we'll wrap up with any last comments or questions. So the next one is, my husband eats ice cream in front of the TV every night after dinner. So that's a cue. How might we adapt that situation without getting rid of our husband, without eliminating our husband? Go to another room. Have one of your approved snacks or shakes during this time. Good. So going to another room is good, but that might be the time that we sort of, one of the few times that we have to, bond with our significant others because, we're working all day. Drink a protein shake, drink more water, and tell him it's not healthy for him. Shame him. Just kidding. So these are all great ideas. Sometimes it may be best just to leave the room. Another time it might be best to ask him not to eat that in front of you. Ask him to eat it at the kitchen table or somewhere else, or just not to bring it into the home. So sort of eliminate the ice cream if you can. Someone recommended journal how mad you are at him for eating it in front of you, which is great. That's a healthy way to kind of get out those emotions. Sometimes it can be helpful to do other activities that sort of distract you and that are not compatible with eating or eating ice cream. So for some of us females, it may be, we're sitting there watching TV, but we're knitting, we're doing something with our hands, maybe we're even doing a little bit of exercise. doing something that just distracts us and makes us, sorry, I just got feedback from one of the participants. She had given a recommendation to do something that you enjoy when this happens, when your husband or your spouse is eating ice cream. So walk, read, call a friend, that sort of thing. And maybe even challenge yourself, like say, you know what, he's eating ice cream, that stinks, I really want it. I'm going to make sure I do something healthy for myself during that time. So I'm going to challenge myself to walk in place while we watch TV for the entire time that it takes him to eat the ice cream. And then you can know that at the end of, you know, his 550 calorie ice cream dessert, you have 550 additional steps. That sort of thing. Maybe making kind of a fun personal challenge out of it. So that was my last example for the day. I hope that you guys found this information valuable. I get the sense that a lot of you are really sort of aware and have already been thinking about managing cues and triggers because you're very good at identifying the different types of cues and triggers and ways to manage them, adapt them, eliminate them, that sort of thing. So that's wonderful. I encourage you to continue to identify what has worked for you in the past, what's been the problem in the past, and plan for the future to manage triggers and be aware of what your triggers are. I really encourage you to use your food journaling as a resource to go back and identify patterns and gain insight into things about yourself and your behaviors that you may not be aware of, and to also practice the emotional check-ins of what am I feeling and what do I need in the moment, because it will over time cause you to be just naturally more emotionally aware and able to cope and utilize healthy strategies for managing those emotions. So we're just about out of time today. Are there any questions or comments or advice for the group, inspirational comments, anything at all? We got a lot of folks saying thank you. As I said, in all candidacy, I'm still getting comfortable with the sort of the virtual presentation. It's very different than leading groups live. And being able to respond to body language and that sort of thing. So I'm a work in progress, but thank you for listening to me today and being present. And if you haven't ever attended group in person, I do encourage you really to try that at least once because it is a different experience. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. If you will, please hang around and complete the survey and give us feedback about ways that we can improve our presentations, content, delivery, all of the above. Thank you, guys.